The last time I played the original Mass Effect trilogy, I was still a teenager. So when I got my hands on the Legendary Edition, I was excited to see how the games held up. And I'm happy to say that Mass Effect 1 actually holds up a lot better than I thought it would. The whole series has kind of fallen out of favor with people over the last few years, which is understandable considering the reaction to the ending, but I honestly don't think these games get enough credit for how great they are, and that starts with the first game. A game that, if I recall, many fans of the franchise outright skipped, which is a shame because so much of the world building and thematic setup happens in this first installment. So this time around, I wanted to make sure I was going into this playthrough with a fresh perspective and open mind. I decided to go with the default female Shepard, who I named Elizabeth. And I went with Vanguard because I remembered it being the most fun to play. But I did mess around with the character creator quite a bit, and I'm happy to say it's much improved in the Legendary Edition. It's still something of a challenge to make a good looking Shepard, especially if you're playing as a guy, but the presets all look a lot better than they used to, and they serve as good starting points. Just watch out for those cheekbones. Overall, the character creator is passable. If anything, I wish we could customize the default Shepards, like change their hair, eyes, or skin color, because I would have liked to go with the basic look with some minor alterations. But as it stands, it's fine, and it didn't affect my enjoyment of the game all that much. Once I had my character ready to go, I was off on my first mission with the crew of the Normandy, and man, the nostalgia hit me hard. Walking around the ship and talking to my crewmates just made me feel right at home, and the dialogue was a lot better than I remembered it. It can be stilted or awkward at times, but it's much better than some other BioWare games. And even though you can't see exactly what your character is going to say, there are usually enough context clues to pick a choice that fits what you're going for. The Paragon and Renegade system honestly isn't all that bad either. At least in the first game. There's almost always a neutral option in the dialogue menus, and I found that switching between the different kinds of responses added a lot of nuance to my Shepard's character. Getting to choose your character's backstory is something I wish a lot more games would try. Even though each background option only changes minor things throughout the story, they really help you get into your character's head. Each time I made a major decision, I put a good amount of thought into how my Shepard's past experiences would affect whatever choice they made. I especially enjoyed playing as a ruthless, gets-the-job-done-at-all-costs Shepard who slowly started opening up and growing attached to her team. The game gives you a lot of great role-playing opportunities, and your Shepard can even have something of a character arc. Experiencing the game again made me realize just how great the world building really is. I've known these characters and their stories for over a decade, but it was nice to get something of a fresh start with them and see how the game actually conveys this information to the player. It doesn't usually hold your hand, which is something I appreciated a lot. You see a Turian within the first few minutes of the game, and it expects you to just roll with it, which is fucking awesome. The onus is on you as the player to ask questions, explore alternate routes, and read any information you might find. If you do those things, you get a better understanding of the universe, the different species, their politics, and how everything comes together. Each piece of lore was rewarding to delve into, and it always felt like there was more to learn around the corner. The story itself is simple enough, but there's a lot of aesthetic and thematic choices that make the game stand out. Notably, the Reapers are these Lovecraftian, existentially terrifying things that just speak to my heart. ME1 is basically about fighting giant space Cthulhu, which is just rad as fucking hell, and things like the Husks and other horror elements are used well. The Geth are some of the best designed enemies I've ever seen in a game. They're so memorable and cool looking and intriguing. They're like AI cultists that worship their mechanical space Cthulhu overlord. And when you learn about their history with the Quarians, you're even able to sympathize with them a bit. The conflict between the Quarians and the Geth is one of the central issues throughout all three games, so it's great to see it established so early on. A lot of the foreshadowing in the early parts of the game is kind of on the nose, like when they tell you there are no human specters, and you'd make a great one, and isn't it funny how there's one here on this mission with us, and no one knows why because it's a big secret? Oh, what a surprise, that's the entire setup of the game. But for what it's worth, the story immediately veers off into another, much more engaging direction. Your Spectre contact is killed, and you're getting blamed for his death and the failure of the mission. The Council won't believe you, and Saren seems likely to get away with everything. This is a great way to set up conflict with a villain who Shepard hasn't even met yet. And sure, it might be a bit cliche, but it works. And it takes you to the Citadel, which is one of the coolest environments in all of gaming. It's like a big space station metropolis. It's got different sections displaying class disparity, CSEC operatives who never get anything done. And while I'm on that topic, I will say, one thing the whole series suffers from is how totally unchecked power and anti-politician it is. Occasionally you can question the dangers of having an organization like the Spectres, but the game definitely doesn't want you to think too hard about that. And while Adina might be a dick, he's still on your side at the beginning of the game, and he obviously cares about humanity's best interests. Which is why it's annoying when, out of nowhere, he grounds your ship and starts siding with the Council when it comes to the Reaper threat. I mean, come on, can't this guy be a little less cartoonishly, politicians bad? And a lot of the game feels like it lacks nuance in that way, which is a shame because the world feels so rich and diverse. It makes you want to explore and learn everything there is to know about it. But so many of the people in this world feel one note, like they're designed to be ideological obstacles and nothing more. And often the dialogue choices the game presents you with don't let you delve much deeper, though there are some notable exceptions. Some side quests have a surprising amount of depth and force the player to make some genuinely tough calls, like the pregnant woman whose child might have a rare but deadly disease, the same disease that recently killed the child's father. The woman's brother-in-law is trying to convince her to undergo in utero gene therapy. This would eliminate the chances of the child inheriting the disease, but comes with its own set of risks and potential consequences. The mother is apprehensive because if she were to undergo the therapy and there were side effects, she'd feel responsible. On paper, it might seem like there's a simple solution to this issue. If there's a 1 in 100 chance that the child will inherit this disease and a 1 in 1,000 chance of them experiencing any negative side effects from the therapy, then the best option should be to play the odds and go with the therapy. But doing so goes against the mother's wishes when it comes to her body and her child. And there are also ethical implications of altering a child's DNA while they're still in the womb. Would this kind of technology allow parents to change their child's eye color or facial structure? What about things like skin color, sexual orientation, or even sex? The game doesn't go into those concepts, probably for the best, but it makes you think about them while you're considering your decisions. In another quest, a grieving husband tells you that the military won't release his wife's body after she was killed in action. When you speak with the person in charge of releasing the body, he tells you that the military needs to keep and study her because she was killed by never-before-seen technology. And in death, she might save an untold number of lives through those studies. So do you convince the Alliance to release her body, or do you convince her husband to allow them to test her? Neither option is necessarily the right call, as you have to choose between the moral and practical benefits of both outcomes. The choices in these quests don't affect the overall story at all, but they still feel meaningful and necessary to what Mass Effect is trying to do. One of the biggest criticisms the series faces is its lack of meaningfully different choices and consequences. And that's definitely fair to some extent, but choices like these have an immediate value that doesn't require them to branch off into larger, more complex narrative threads. Just the fact that these decisions get you to pause and think for a few moments is a triumph in and of itself. Having the agency to make these decisions is meaningful, even if we don't see the long-term consequences of some of our choices. Decisions like whether or not to kill the Rachni Queen don't really change anything in the grand scheme of things, but the fact that the game allows you to make that decision still matters. And beyond just the philosophical, these moments also offer excellent role-playing opportunities. My ruthless shepherd couldn't bring herself to destroy the remnants of an entire species, even as her companions argued against that decision. She understood that the blood of anyone the Rachni killed would indirectly be on her hands, but still, she found that to be the lesser of two evils. It's rare that games present me with choices that don't feel like they have a clear-cut answer. Sure, sparing the Rachni Queen is marked as the Paragon option, but there's at least an argument to be made that it's the wrong decision. And not all of the game's quests are nearly as interesting or thought-provoking, and the philosophy behind these choices might be pretty basic, but that's okay, because if there's anything Mass Effect does right, it's getting you to at least feel like your choices matter. Even when I know the outcomes, the game has a way of making me still care, and it deserves credit for that. Later on, the game's thematic elements and world-building really come together into something special. Learning what the Reapers are, what Sovereign is, how the Protheans, the Keepers, and the Citadel fit into everything, those revelations leave a lasting impact. The Protheans, in a way, are like the gods of the Mass Effect universe. Hell, the Hanar literally worship them. Everything we learn about them tells us they were these all-powerful, all-knowing species who built the foundation of modern technology. But in reality, they simply found the Citadel and the Relays just like everyone else did. Instead, it was the Reapers who built these things as a means of continuing their cycle of life and death. I don't think the game gets enough credit for what it's doing here. The cycle is reminiscent of concepts like the Buddhist and Hindu samsara, and the game's willingness to build up the Protheans as these godlike beings and then tear them down right before our eyes, well, it's almost Nietzschean. God is dead and giant space Cthulhu killed them. Mass Effect's lore is full of illusions like these, ranging from things like the Protheans mass cryogenically freezing themselves to questions of what comes before. What exactly are the Reapers? Who built them? Why do they adhere to this cycle? These are questions the game doesn't answer, but it also wants you to consider them. Sometimes your companions will even allude to these topics, though the game is surprisingly reserved in doing so. If there's any place I actually felt let down coming back to Mass Effect 1, it's the characters. Everyone on your team is at least interesting, but they're also a lot more one note than I remembered. It's fun hearing about their pasts, their cultures, and their thoughts on the events of the game, but once you get past these things, there's not much more to learn about them, which especially hurts the game's love interests. The romance in Mass Effect is filled to the brim with awkward tension and forced flirting that, to be blunt, isn't very good. Liara's romance is at least cute, but it definitely feels dated at this point, especially if you're playing as a female Shepard. And while Kaidan does get too much undeserved criticism from people, he's also just not that interesting. Learning about the mistreatment of human biotics is fascinating, but it's tough to care about him still being hung up on some girl he went to school with. And honestly, I just hate Ashley. I really tried to like her this time around, and some of the stuff with her family is okay, but she's just very unlikable, and I can't get over that. Garrus, Rex, and Tali are super memorable, but they suffer the most from being one note. Garrus only ever complains about the red tape on his job, and Tali is seemingly incapable of talking about anything but what it was like back home. Rex is the most interesting of the bunch for sure. You get to learn about his people and his thoughts on their current place in the political landscape of the galaxy. The role of the Krogans in the story is one of the most important ongoing thematic issues throughout the series, and in the first game you're actually faced with a compelling choice regarding that issue. The confrontation with Rex is easily one of the best scenes in the game, but at the same time, Rex also has the least justification for even being a part of your crew. He pretty much just comes along because he thought it would be fun, and sure, he's a badass fighter, but the game doesn't exactly do a great job of selling you on him at first, especially if you don't recruit him before taking on Fisk. Overall, I loved my time revisiting the first game in this legendary franchise. ME1's combat is always going to be of its time, but the Legendary Edition definitely improves the gunplay, and the powers were always a blast to use. By the end of the playthrough though, I was definitely looking forward to ME2's combat. But that hasn't stopped me from going back for further playthroughs of the first game, based solely on how much fun it is to throw people into the sky with Lift. And while the skill attribution system in this game is a lot deeper than later entries, there are way too many points to assign, and I'm glad they cut that down, even if Mass Effect 2 does overdo it. And as a special shout out, I didn't know where else to fit this, the fact that you can convince Saren to kill himself at the end of the game is genuinely incredible. It's easily one of the best examples I've ever seen of dialogue options directly influencing gameplay. As for my final thoughts, I'd say the game is absolutely worth revisiting or playing for the first time if you haven't, and I hope it gets more love and recognition this time around. Mass Effect 1 is an overshadowed gem, and it deserves much more serious critical thought than it ever got before. For me, it's sitting at around an 8.5 out of 10, and I'm looking forward to making more of this kind of content after finishing the other games in the series. There's only more to talk about with each game, and I have some pretty interesting thoughts on what I've experienced of them so far. If you want to see more stuff like this from me in the future, please consider liking the video and subscribing to my channel. And if you're interested in signing up for my Patreon, the link will be in the description down below. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video all the way through, and I hope you have a wonderful day. I'll see you guys next time.